Hi, my name is Jay Sugarman, and I want to welcome you to Museum Open House. This ongoing series features and highlights many of the outstanding museums and other cultural institutions. The main purpose of most programs is to inform viewers about current and upcoming exhibits, various programs, resources, and other opportunities that are available for the general public. Today, via Zoom, we're fortunate to have as our guests Matthew Wilding and Kanisorn Wongsrichanalai. Matthew is the Senior Director of Interpretations and Future Projects at Revolutionary Spaces, and Kanisorn serves as the Peter Drummey Chief Historian at the Massachusetts Historical Society. They're here today to inform us about the fascinating exhibition, The Road to Revolution, Massachusetts and the Independence Movement, which is on display at the Old State House through January 2027. Developed and presented through a partnership between Revolutionary Spaces and the Massachusetts Historical Society, the exhibition invites us back to 1775 and 1776 when protests turned into armed resistance and the momentum towards independence accelerated. Through personal letters, diary entries, battlefield artifacts, and a rare 1776 Boston printing of the Declaration of Independence, the exhibition offers an intimate look at the uncertainty, courage, and conviction that divide the first year of revolution. Let's start by meeting our guest and then finding out how Boston became the epicenter of rebellion and how those choices continue to shape our democracy today. Welcome. So delighted you're both able to be here.
Thank you, Jay. Great to be here.
You know,
Pleasure being here. Thank you for having us.
very eager to find out all about the exhibition and have you inform viewers. But before we jump right to that, I think it would be of interest if each of you just very briefly share a little bit about your background, perhaps what your current position entails. Matthew, would you start, please?
Sure, yeah. I'm Matthew Wilding. I'm the Director of Interpretation and Future Projects at Rev Spaces, as said. So I oversee the exhibits and interpretation, as well as some of the educational programming at both the Old State House and Old South Meeting House on Boston's Freedom Trail. And really, I've been tasked with reinterpreting these spaces for a new generation of people as we march into the 250th anniversary of America.
Wonderful, wonderful. Kanisorn, welcome. A little bit about your background and position, please.
Absolutely. So I first came to the Massachusetts Historical Society as a graduate student many, many years ago. I was a professor for 10 years before coming back as director of research. And in my position as the chief historian, there are really two parts to it. One is to oversee the research department, which oversees the scholarship, the academic wing, the fellowship program, the seminars, the conferences at the MHS. And then the historian position is really to be able to meet people and speak to the public about the wonderful collections that are under our roof at 1154 Boylston Street.
Wonderful, wonderful. Terrific place to visit. I've enjoyed many times there and terrific exhibits that are put on as well. Matthew, could you start by sharing why and how the Road to Rebellion came about?
Yeah, so when Road to Revolution initially came about as an idea, it was just kind of a suggestion between multiple staff members, both here and at Mass Historical, that really we should be working together. Like we have these two incredible buildings. We have gallery space on the Freedom Trail, which is hard to get, and MHS is of course the oldest historical collection organization in America, and their collection is incredible. It's staggering to see, but their space is relatively difficult to get to, and
Hmm.
it's rather small. So we have, somewhere in the vicinity of 100,000 visitors a year, and we wanted to show them the great stuff that Massachusetts has. So it started as a conversation almost 6 years ago between me and a colleague at MHS. And then it kind of just evolved over the years. Different staffers came and went in both organizations before finally, about 2 years ago, we came to an agreement that we probably still don't have enough time at this point to create a whole new exhibit, but maybe this great exhibit that they had planned for the set to commemorate 1775 could visit us the year after it was at MHS. So we made a few very small tweaks to it. We added a couple of objects, but really we brought the exhibit from MHS from last year into our building with a slight redesign.
Nice, nice.
Yeah.
Kanisorn, what does focusing specifically on 1775-76 allow visitors to understand that broader Revolutionary War exhibits often miss or don't cover?
Yes, but first, let me add a little bit to what Matthew was saying earlier there. First off, Matthew, I think we prefer to say we are the first historical society rather than the
Sorry,
oldest.
sorry.
But no, his point is absolutely correct. MHS is one of the leading research libraries in the country. We have a lot of paper and we have a lot of documents, but there's really nothing quite like reading those documents and standing in the space that is made historic by the people who wrote those documents. And so I think this is a fantastic partnership. It's a wonderful opportunity to have visitors go to the old State House, look out, look at the Boston Massacre site, and be able to trace this
Yeah.
straight line between what happened at the Boston Massacre site that went down to Philadelphia, went to Lexington and Concord, Bunker Hill, and then straight back to that balcony when Colonel Thomas Crofts read the Declaration of Independence. I think it comes full circle, and I think folks who visit the exhibit will really get a sense, an understanding of the place and the time period. But focusing on the events that led up to the outbreak of the fighting and the events immediately before the decision for independence, well, we can see with much greater clarity, without feeling quite so rushed, the action and reaction. What prompted one action? What prompted its reaction? What led one group to behave in one way or the other? And I think this allows both a better understanding of the causes of the outbreak of the war and independence, and also helps visitors perhaps understand how historical events in general transpire. People living through dramatic events are operating based on how they perceive the world and are thus interpreting and trying to make sense of the data that they have. They're making the best of their circumstances. So, doing something like this, slowing down the timeline, looking at one year,
Hmm.
allows people to identify moments that might have gone differently. There's no inevitability to historical events. Anything can change. And additionally, it also reminds people to look at events broadly. A critical and dramatic event, take the Battle of Bunker Hill, might be interpreted in one way at the time, a British victory, but in the long run, it may have had unintended consequences. For example, it made General Howe much more cautious about attacking rebel positions, and given the dreadful losses at Bunker Hill. It's also interpreted as an American victory in some circles because the rebels that stood up to the regulars were able to do so despite having no professional training. And it demonstrated that this is a strategy that could potentially win the war. So I think there's a lot to learn from taking this exhibit with just one year at a time.
Most definitely. And we're so fortunate, as you said, to have it right here in our backyard where people throughout the country might look at a textbook and read about the Boston Massacre, say, but we can actually visit it quite easily and then circle back now to the old State House and to have a better sense of the whole context. Matthew, for those who haven't had a chance to visit yet, before we look at some wonderful items and artifacts, could you provide just a brief overview of the layout and the various areas in the exhibit?
Yeah, so it's a really straightforward traditional exhibit layout, which is really helpful because we're trying to give people really straightforward context as to what happened. It's really important for folks to understand the audience on the Freedom Trail is very often people who are almost on a pilgrimage. They don't really know what it is they're looking for. They don't know what the old State House is. Kanisorn is correct to point out the significance of the space. I take it for granted because I sit in the attic all the time. But this is in a lot of ways where America started, right? It's where the Boston Massacre happened. It's where the occupation of Boston was. Our other side is where the Boston Tea Party started. These are significant spaces. But lots of times audiences come here and they don't even know what the Boston Massacre is. They've heard of it, but they don't really know what it is. And rather than kind of scoff at that, we've taken it as kind of a point of pride to be excited about the fact that these folks have made a conscious choice to want to find out, and they came to us to do that, right? So in this exhibit, you have three major events that are highlighted in a very clear linear way. The first one is the midnight ride of Paul Revere and the battles of Lexington and Concord.
Mhm.
The second is Bunker Hill, and then the third is the evacuation. And these hubs are very clearly separated throughout the space. So essentially, Paul Revere's section is the north wall. The Bunker Hill the Battle of Bunker Hill is the west wall, and then evacuation is south wall. So very clear, very distinct, and does a really great job of highlighting objects that are very obviously associated with the historical event. So it almost requires no interpretation
Yeah.
that we offer it, because the text actually speaks for itself in a lot of these documents. They're really incredible.
Wonderful. Thank you. Speaking of objects and items, Kanisorn, I know you have several from the exhibition to share with us. Would you please start screen sharing a couple of those?
All right. I think you should be able to see the first item
Ve-
on here.
Very well.
And so the Historical Society is primarily a research library, as I mentioned. So we are the home of millions and millions and millions of documents. And so I'm going to highlight several documents, but of course, with those collections, there are also uh, uh, objects and artifacts that come along with them, which also speak volumes about the past. But this first item is probably one of my favorite items in the collection. I think, Matthew, we agree on this, and you can
Yeah.
certainly chime in too. But this is one of the documents that Paul Revere produced. This is a deposition after what would later become known as his Midnight Ride, the famous Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. So this is something he writes immediately after the events of April 1775. I believe it is an attempt to determine who fired the first shots at
Mm.
the Battle of Lexington. And it's a draft document. They're going to switch it out because paper cannot be exposed to light for so long. We want to protect the document, so the actual copy will also be substituted at some point, maybe halfway through the exhibit. The MHS also has a document that Revere wrote 20 years later, again describing the Midnight Ride, and it is one of our most prized positions. But it is a clear bit of evidence that so people will understand that the only reason we know about these historic events, the only reason we know about the significance of places and battlefields and buildings is because people make meaning out of them, and we learn that meaning by the documents that they leave behind. So this is a really remarkable item. It is currently there on display. And Matthew, do you want to add anything about that?
Yeah, it's partnered in a case with the Longfellow account of the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere, the poem, in children's book form.
Mm.
And to Canisorn's point, this is essentially the first draft of Paul Revere's experience on April 18th and 19th of 1775. And the great thing about this document and the subsequent document he writes 20 years later is you see this evolution of how he remembers his own signature event,
Yeah.
right? He becomes much more heroic as time goes on, and it's such a relatable account, right? The night after you do anything that's of consequence, you're full of adrenaline. You're kind of just spitting out what happened. You're totally incriminating yourself here. You're acknowledging things like that. Maybe you said some things you shouldn't have said to some British soldiers. But then, 20 years later, you're telling a story, the same story, and you come out as the flawless hero. It reminds me of Brian Scalabrine talking about the finals when he was in the Celtics. Uh,
That's funny.
it's just a great and true, like just such a sincere and true account in object form. In fact, my first experience with MHS when I was in college was with this document and the other version of it, because they actually they made books, little pamphlets of it for education purposes years ago to illustrate the difference of the accounts. And I just think it's such a powerful and fun document to have out. And it's literally the first thing when you walk in. This is what you start.
Ah.
Right.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, having and hearing about the document is terrific, but the background both of you provided just enriches it, and I think just entices us to want to see it even more. Kanisorn, I think you have one or two more items to share.
I do. Let's turn to these delicate silver spoons belonging to Relief Ellery. So, Relief Ellery was a 20-year-old woman who was living in Charlestown, and she's living in one of the houses that hasn't been evacuated yet during the time. This is right on the morning of the Battle of Bunker Hill. She's sitting down to breakfast with her family, and she is told that they have to get out because there's a battle coming. There's going to be a lot of fighting, and for their safety, they need to retreat right now. And someone
Hmm.
grabs these silver spoons that are on the dining room table. They stick them in her pocket, and then they leave. She goes away. By the time she comes back, these two spoons are all that she has left in
Wow.
terms of her possessions in the world. And so the spoons are passed down generation to generation through the family, and just a testament to what their ancestors endured during the Revolutionary War. And it should be a reminder to us that war, no matter how noble the cause, is absolutely devastating. And there are a lot of people who are trapped in the middle who may side with one side or the other, or are more likely just wanting to get through their lives
Yeah.
safely. And this is just a reminder that there were real people in real lives who were deeply affected for generations because of what happened during the revolution.
It's so true. There's so much pageantry almost in the imagery of a lot of our revolutionary textbooks from childhood where and even in some of the objects in this exhibit like Dr. Joseph Warren's sword, but these objects, things like a woman pocketing spoons in a moment of decision making before they flee, or later in the exhibit there's this account by William Cheever of the occupation of Boston where he's essentially writing about how difficult it is to get food and how difficult it is to maintain his cattle on his property because everyone else wants food too. They're again incredibly relatable objects and moments that help normal people like us see ourselves in the revolution. We can do thought experiments all the time about would we join the army or would we stand up to oppression? But some of the most consequential decisions that people have to make in every time of crisis are what do I grab? What do I save? What can I do? How do I feed my family? Where do I go for protection? And those are really universal emotions.
That's one of the things I've enjoyed about previous exhibits at the Old State House through Revolutionary Spaces
Thank you.
is putting visitors in the position to consider situations and try to make a decision. And I think what's been encouraging in recent years throughout museums and textbooks and other accounts are the voices of everyday people and the everyday objects and what they can really inform us, not necessarily the major heroes or certain swords that display different historical events. But let's move on and take advantage of our time, Kanisorn, and see what next item you
Let's
have to
go to
present.
the next one. MHS also has quite the collection of medals and
Mm.
coins. One of those medals is currently on display at the Old State House. This is one of the Comitia Americana medals, and it is Washington before Boston. The text here on this side, on the front of the medal, translates as the American Congress to George Washington, General in Chief of the American armies, the defender of liberty. And on the reverse, you have this picture, this depiction of Washington and his officers on Dorchester Heights, watching as the British ships are leaving Boston Harbor on evacuation day. And this text translates as the enemy first put to flight. Boston recovered 17 March 1776. So this medal is in the tradition of European nations celebrating military victories by having medals struck for the occasion. The United States had no such facilities for this, and so the Congress, John Adams, convinced Congress to get someone in France to produce these medals for this victory. There are ultimately, I think, 11 over the course of the war,
Mhm.
but this is the last one that was completed. And the reason for that is that no one in Europe knew what George Washington looked like. And so the person who made the medal had to wait for a depiction of the victorious Washington to get over to Europe before he could finish the product itself. Thomas Jefferson brings back the medals to Washington. There is a gold version of this, the Golden Medal, that is actually at the Boston Public Library, and it belongs to the citizens of Boston. And then there was a case of mostly silver medals that he brought back, presenting to Washington in 1790 as well. And this is one of the examples of that set. So this is a great moment. It is the first major American victory of the war, and it is a demonstration of Washington's ability to lead. And the anniversary of that is coming up very shortly, the 250th anniversary of Evacuation Day.
Kanisorn, I don't know if you happen to have this one available, but why is the 1776 Boston broadside so rare?
Let me go straight to that one. And I think, and Matthew, feel free to chime in, but I think the nature of these publications is one of those reasons. They are printed in order to be distributed widely. They're printed very quickly. They're not printed on paper that's supposed to last a very long time. And if you think about today, who goes around collecting pieces of paper that you see tacked to poles or bulletin boards or anything like that? So there are certainly some historically minded individuals out there who collected and preserved items like this, but this is an extremely rare document, and it's printed here in Boston by E. It's by Gill, I think.
It's Gil.
But Matthew can fill in some of this.
Yeah, I agree almost entirely with what you just said. It's these are ephemeral objects, right? They're posted on walls and on trees and inside
Hmm.
taverns. They're handed out and then read publicly. They're meant to be used. In fact, as Pauline Maier wrote so well about, even the real Declaration of Independence wasn't taken particularly good care of for quite a long time, right? So these are rare in that there aren't thousands of them kind of around, and there certainly were in the 1770s. I will say, like, rare is a subjective term. We're circulating three or four of these throughout the exhibit, throughout the exhibit's year-long lifespan. So, I mean, between the two institutions, we have quite a few of them. But it's powerful to see this document from the year that it was actually issued being connected to the actual reading of the Declaration of Independence. And I think that's the significance of this document and the excitement we have for showing it. I just want to give another plug to the history of the building. This is where the Declaration of Independence was first read in the city of Boston, or in the town of Boston, from the balcony. And now you get to see one of the original prints, which was printed essentially next door, right next to the balcony where it was read. And that's incredibly exciting. So yeah, I mean, these are ephemeral objects. They're gonna disappear and sometimes reappear. But we're honored to have a couple of them at our disposal between our collection and MHS's.
No, so powerful to see in this moment of the 250th anniversary for sure.
Can I just add
Um,
real quick also that
please.
something else that's perfect about the setting, the old State House, and the Declaration being there is that so many of the charges that the drafters of this document levied against King George III took place in the streets of Boston. The Quartering Act, taxation without
Mm.
representation, troops on our soil without the consent of the legislatures. I mean, just the list goes on. Trial, shutting down of the port, all of these, they're listed there. Those events refer to events that took place here. Another reason why Massachusetts is the spark of the revolution.
Yeah, one might say Boston before Washington.
There you go. Matthew, as we mark 250 years, what do you hope visitors reconsider perhaps about democracy after experiencing this exhibition?
It's a great question. First of all, I want them to consider and reconsider how it comes about and how hard it is to achieve. Kanisorn very eloquently mentioned at the beginning that looking at this one year, 1775 into 1776, gives us the opportunity to see how not just how the results came to be, but how it wasn't necessarily inevitable, right? And if you look at the whole stretch of the revolution, going back to 1764, 1765, that becomes even more obvious. The farther back you go, the more amazing it is that the end result was that this became the first European colonies to successfully secede and overthrow a European power. That's really exciting, an exciting story, but it's also a really unlikely one. Uh, America is an unlikely story that inspired a lot of other unlikely stories throughout the world.
Mhm.
But it's just as unlikely or maybe likely that it won't succeed if people don't continue to work for it. So, getting to experience firsthand some of the objects and spaces where people made these events happen, hopefully will inspire people to continue to want to be engaged in their society.
Most definitely. In closing, in addition to having the exhibition available all the way through January 2027,
Mhm.
will there be some extra programming, other resources, opportunities highlighted throughout the upcoming year?
Yeah, so I mean, there are major events that happen pretty much every year that just happen to be really closely associated with this exhibit. So the most notable is the reading of the Declaration of Independence on the 4th of July.
Mm,
We have a major event every year alongside the city where the Declaration of Independence is read to thousands of people. I imagine it'll probably be tens or even maybe 100,000 people this year
wow.
from the balcony of the old State House. And it will be one of our flagship exhibits for Harbor Fest for the 250th. It will also be alongside a new exhibit or immersive experience we're opening on the week of the 4th of July called Ruckus, which will be opening at the Old South Meeting House, which we anticipate is going to be the largest historical draw for Boston tourism this summer.
Oh,
So
fabulous.
we really thought about this when we brought this exhibit on. We want people to see this incredible series of objects and to partner it with a very Rev Spaces new experience at the Old South Meeting House, which is very high technology and a lot more like much like the last exhibit that you saw here, very bright and modern. It's a really fun and exciting juxtaposition where we can really invite people to consider the historical objects and the lives of people in the 18th century, and then help them get context to experience it within their modern lives.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, unfortunately, we've come to the end of the program. I want to thank both of you so much for taking time to be here,
Yeah.
providing the wonderful overview for the Road to Revolution, getting to experience, enjoy the context of some of the items and objects available for visitors, and definitely encourage visitors and others to make their way there through January 2027. Thank you again to both of you and continued success with future endeavors.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Also want to thank those of you watching for joining us and hope you'll be able to tune in next time.